Can you imagine a 16-year-old boy beating Magnus Carlsen, the world champion? It seems like impossible, but it has been done. Yesterday, on the 8th round of the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour 2022. The tournament is of a rapid format, 15 minutes plus 10-second increment, and this tournament is played online. Yep. And the total prize fund of the tournament is $1.5 million, which is a huge amount of money. And this game is between Magnus Carlsen versus Praggnanandhaa. Well known, both the players are well known. And this game is so interesting because Praggnanandhaa is only 16 years old and Magnus Carlsen is the world champion. So already a very interesting game. And Magnus Carlsen playing against such youngsters is always very interesting. So it's going to be very fun to analyze this interesting game. So let's check it out. So Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces in the 8th round started out the game with 1d4. And Praggnanandhaa with the black pieces replied with knight to f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight to c3, and we have the queen's gambit decline variation. And in this position, there are many moves for black to continue the position. Black can play bishop e7, bishop b4, c6, the triangular system, which is actually very good and very trending nowadays. And fourth, there could be some b6 ideas with the bishop b7. But Praggnanandhaa decided to play c5. This is also very common. The semi-Tarash defense, e3, knight to c6, and here we have c into d5, e into d5, and here bishop to b5, pinning up the knight, and now idea is to castle. And here Praggnanandhaa also decided to capture the d4 pawn, and here we have e into d4. In this position, I think capturing the pawn with the knight slightly much more accurate. The reason is very simple, because now the d5 pawn is isolated and white pawn structure is very nice, and now white is putting pressure on the knight on c6. But okay, but the bad thing is that the bishop on c1 is bad. That's the problem. We need to develop the bishop some like perhaps b3 bishop b2 or bishop d2 bishop c3, like that. But okay, Magnus decided to capture the pawn with the pawn, which is also a complete fine move because it opens up the bishop. Bishop d6, castle, black castle, h3, stopping this bishop g4 ideas, which can be very deadly for white. So black does the same, and now both the sides have no back rank issues. Yeah, because both the sides are having a one square for the king. And this position is already pretty equal. Any player can guess this position because it's a pretty common position, and white lost his advantage because black is already very comfortable in the position. It's both the sides have completed their development, castled, developed the minor pieces, and bishops are left to develop. So complete fine position, and Magnus decided to play rook to e1, bishop to f5, and here knight e5. Knight to e5 looks a very aggressive move from the white side, as we are centralizing our knight. And capturing this knight, like for example knight into knight, is already wrong because d into e5 and black loses a piece. And after bishop into e5, still it's bad for black because after d5, white pawn structure is very strong and black is already having weakness, like the d pawn is isolated, the knight is attacked, and white is already better. And many actually there are many players who try to take this knight, like many club level players. One advice from my side and from Praggnanandhaa as well, he played rook to c8. The idea was very simple because knight was attacking the knight and the bishop. So black simply played rook to c8, developing the rook simply and also protecting the knight. And white played bishop to f4, a very nice move and a very natural move. And now white have successfully completed his development by developing the bishop. There could be some ideas like moving the knight, attacking the bishop on d6. Black played rook e8, rook c1, taking control of the open file. Black does the same, and here Praggnanandhaa decided to play queen to b6. Not a natural move to see, because after playing queen b6, it looks like perhaps white can move the knight, the bishop on f4 attacking the bishop on d6, but not in this position, because if you try to move the knight, black can simply capture the bishop on f4. This is what Praggnanandhaa calculated. So nothing is happening, so white decided to capture the knight on c6 with the bishop. The reason Magnus decided to capture the knight is because the position is already very complicated. Black can at any point go for capturing the knight. The pawn on d4 is hanging by the knight and the queen. Perhaps a6 can come into the position. So Magnus thought that not to make the position so complicated, but let's decide to capture the knight. He can actually make the position much more complicated by playing queen to d2. The idea of playing queen d2 is to defend the bishop, and in this position, white can move the knight from the e5 square because the queen is now defending the bishop. But okay, he decided to capture the knight. Pawn takes, knight to a4, and here we have queen to a6. So the idea for Magnus Carlsen after capturing the knight is that after pawn takes, now the c6 pawn is weak. It is not a backward pawn because the white pawn is not on b4, but it is at least weak. So Magnus decided to play rook to e3. His idea is to play rook c3 and put pressure on the pawn on c6. Yeah, just create a weakness and target that weakness. Simple as that. Knight to e4 by Praggnanandhaa. Although black pawn structure is bad, but in the exchange black is having the bishop pair, which is actually a very good deal. At the place of playing rook e3, white can also play knight c5, but after knight c5, bc5, rook c5, white simply released the pressure. That is why Magnus played rook e3, keeping the options open for the knight to go on c5 at any point. Knight d4, and in this position, it looks like black knight is also very nicely placed on e4. Perhaps c5 moves can come in the future as the knight is covering the square. Something can happen in the position. In this position, white can simply play bishop h2. The idea is that here white can move the knight because the king is protecting the bishop. Easy as that. But Magnus decided to play f3 in the position, hitting the knight on e4, which was actually not a good move. The reason is as simple as that. The pawn structure is bad in this position because this pawn structure is not so good. The dark squares are extremely weak in this position. Although white is having the dark square bishop, black is also having the dark square bishop. And pawn structure is actually not good for white in this position. Knight to g5, and here we have rook to c3. If you try to capture this knight on g5 with the bishop, at g5, black is having the bishop pair, which is actually very strong for black. And I think black can at any point play f6, hit the knight. That is the reason Magnus didn't capture the knight and played rook to c3. And now there is triple attack on the pawn on c6. You notice, and there are only two defenders. After rook c3, Praggnanandhaa decided to play queen b7. And now many of you are wondering that now it's a triple attack, double defense, so perhaps white can go for capturing the pawn on c6. But not in this position. The reason is as simple as that. The knight is pinned by the bishop. First of all, the knight cannot capture the pawn because bishop into f4. If white tries to capture this pawn with the rook, rook takes, bishop takes, knight. And you have to capture it back, and black simply captures the rook. Black is a rook plus and winning the game. That is the reason white cannot capture this pawn on c6. So white decided to pull the bishop back. And now I think white is threatening to capture the pawn on c6. So black simply played knight to e6. And after knight e6, in this position, for what happened in the game is knight into c6. Which is possible, definitely. But a much better move in this position was to play g4, hitting the bishop g6, and now we have f4, a very strong move. The knight is extremely powerful. f5 can come at any point. Although white king looks weak because It's a overextended structure, but nothing is happening. White king is purely safe. There is no weakness actually, because there is no way black can attack the white king. But actually what happened in the game, knight into c3 c6 turned out to be a blunder. It doesn't look like, but it is. The reason as simple as that, in the game we have knight to f4, which was a blunder, which equalizes the position, but Praggnanandhaa missed the win by capturing the bishop on h2 first, giving a check, king h2, and here we have knight to f4. And here perhaps knight e2 is coming up because hitting the both the rooks. So we have knight e5 stopping this knight e2, cutting the connection. And here we have rook c3, f6, hitting the king, hitting the knight. Knight goes back, and here comes rook e2. And now black is simply threatening rook into g2. You cannot play something like rook c2 to defend it because bishop is simply covering it. And the only move to defend the pawn is to play knight to e3. And after knight e3, here's my question. Feel free to pause the video and try to find this amazing move. Not played by Praggnanandhaa because this variation never happened, but this was the best move and the coolest. I think you must have all found it. This move, bishop into h3, a very cool move. The pawn cannot capture the bishop as the pawn is pinned. The king cannot capture the bishop as the knight is protecting it. And black is already prepared to capture the pawn on g2 next, completely winning the game. So this can happen, would have happened in the game, but we have knight to f4 by Praggnanandhaa, missing this idea, which makes the game equal now. The point is, here comes knight e5. The point is, after knight e5, what happened in the game is bishop into e5. If I show you the same variation after rook c3, and in this position, if black tries to play f6, the problem is that the knight is hanging on f4 in this position. So bishop into f4, and after fe5, there simply comes de5, and white is the one winning in this position, or you can say better in this position. That is the main problem bishop's having on the board. So capturing the bishop first would have been a slight, not slight actually, it would have been simply winning for Praggnanandhaa. But now we have knight e5, bishop e5, de5, and here we have knight to d3. In this position, you cannot go for capturing this knight, thinking that bishop takes, queen takes. The problem is, I go for capturing the rook. Queen takes f4, and after bishop into d3, I'm simply an exchanger. That is the problem, you cannot capture this knight. Rook to c8, rook c8, rook c8, queen c8, bishop to g3. And now in this position, it is a completely equal game. Nothing is happening up. If I count the material, I think, white is the pawn up, but nothing is happening because black pawn on d5 is already very strong. So basically, it's an equal position. Game continued by playing d4, b3, queen to c6, queen to d2, king to h7, king to h2, both the sides making the king safe so that there would be no checks in the future. Bishop to g6, keeping the bishop safe. Queen to h5. Magnus is the one who always goes for the attack. He plays queen to a5. Idea is to capture the pawn on a7, also threatening to capture the pawn on d4. Black played simply queen to c1, queen into a7, queen to e3 in the position. And the idea is to move the knight and try to push the d pawn. Although white is having the 2-pawn advantage, but against the d pawn, which is a pass pawn, makes the game equal. After queen to e3, Magnus made a huge blunder in the position by playing knight to c3. This is you can say the final blunder, but yeah, a very huge blunder made by Magnus Carlsen. He was thinking black cannot capture the knight because the queen is hanging. But black is having an extremely strong move in this position. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move played by Praggnanandhaa in this position. Okay, so I think you must have had great deep thought and you must have came up with this legendary move, knight to f4. The reason this move is legendary is First of all, bishop cannot capture the knight because queen f4 comes with the check. This is the main problem. It comes with a check. White king moves and black captures the knight. And black is a completely peaceless, making the second queen. And if white doesn't capture the knight in this position, and if he tries to play something like else like a4, capturing the knight in this position is not a good move because bishop f4 is simply equal. But you play queen to d2 in this position. This is the thing. You are not simply threatening a mate on g2. So the only way to defend the checkmate is to capture the knight. And here comes queen f4 check, king moves, takes, and it's winning for black. So this is the main problem. So after knight f4, Magnus Carlsen decided to play knight d1 because he is forced to move the knight. Queen to d2, hitting the knight and also threatening a checkmate. Knight to f2. You still can't capture the knight because here comes queen f4 check, king g1, queen to d2. If knight tries to move, because there is no way white can defend the knight, the only way is to play knight f2. But comes the check, king moves, queen takes knight, winning the game. So the only move is to play knight f2. But now comes knight e2, h4. White tries to continue the game because white have to play something at least. h4, and now comes queen u1 by Praggnanandhaa. Queen g1 looks very deadly already. Queen to d7. Perhaps the idea could have been that if black tries to take the bishop, white can go for capturing the pawn, which happened in the game. Knight into g3 and queen into d4. The point is you cannot capture this knight because now comes queen into e5 check. If you try to push, I can give a check, king goes back, capturing the knight, winning the game. And if you try to play something like king to h3, here I can play bishop f5 check, white loses the queen. That is the point. So king into g3 was not possible. That is why Magnus decided to capture the pawn, defending the knight and also hitting the knight. But now comes knight check, king move, knight goes back to e3, queen to b2, and here black is simply a piece plus, yeah? So bishop goes to c2 in this position. And on the move number 39, after playing bishop c2, Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces decided to resign the game, and Praggnanandhaa, a great victory for a 16-year-old boy, beating Magnus Carlsen, the world champion. The reason after bishop c2, Magnus Carlsen decided to resign the game is the knight is being attacked. And if you try to defend the knight, like for example, like knight e4, I can simply play queen h1, check, king g3, queen into g2, check, king f4, knight to d5 check, king f5, queen g6. It's already game over, checkmate. That is the problem. That is why after playing bishop to c2, white decided to resign the game. This was a fantastic game played by 16-year-old Praggnanandhaa against Magnus Carlsen. I hope that all of you must have liked this game. It was a very great fight made by Praggnanandhaa to beat Magnus Carlsen. Yeah, so definitely, yeah, new generation is coming up, becoming much stronger day by day. It's very cool to see. So if you learned something new by watching this game, if it helped you to increase your chess skills or knowledge, then make sure to at least like the video, share this video with your chess friends and family members, and I'm going to come up with these interesting videos for you. So make sure to at least subscribe the channel because it motivates me to upload new videos, and also it will help you to get notified whenever I would be posting new video. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching OneShot Chess.